Did everybody say hello? What was that again?
Hello and welcome to a very special Turkey Chat. It's the last Monday of the month, so that means it's time for Marketing Mondays. And we're very excited to have Ryan and Frank Reese here with us today as special guests. Ryan, do you want to introduce Frank?
Yes, so this man doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Y'all, this is Frank Reese. One of the amazing things about this guy is he has been raising turkeys for 70 years. That's a long time. I'm 27, so I haven't even lived that long yet. This guy's been raising turkeys for longer than that. So yes, he is a primary farmer for Good Shepherd turkeys. And one amazing thing about him is his market. He is marketing to Heritage Foods. And if you guys know about them, they're a really big name. And so really excited to see what kind of information we can glean as a community from a veteran like Frank Reese.
Yes, thank you for joining us today. And before we jump right in, we want to say leave us a comment and let us know you're here. We'll be taking questions for Frank throughout the program. Is that right, Ryan?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so yes, leave us a comment. Let us know what you think, what you want to know as we talk about the business side of things. Also, a big shout out to our members. Frank, you're a Life member, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, so it's members like Frank and everybody else tuning in today that help us make programs like Marketing Mondays and Turkey Chats possible. So if you have questions at the end about how to become a member and help make sure that programs like these are sustainable into the future, please let us know. We'd love to hook you up. And I think that's it. Ryan, how do you want to start today?
Great. So I want to start with, I guess, kind of the conundrum that we have with heritage meat, period, right? So a lot of livestock breeds that are heritage based, we're normally seeing how it's really hard to market something that's very unique and nuanced, something that even has a lot of cultural background to it. So one thing I want to ask, and this is mainly to new and beginning farmers who are considering maybe raising heritage turkeys, is really understanding what are some branding and marketing challenges that any new farmer to the heritage turkey world might experience while trying to figure out their market and market turkeys.
Well, I think the number one thing if you're thinking about doing this is decide who your market is. You know, who are you wanting to sell to? It's very difficult, you know, if you buy a bunch of turkeys and you don't have a plan. So you really have to decide who is my market. And I've always told people there's two choices. If you want to do this and do something more than just break even, if you're lucky, is you either stay very small and sell completely to friends and neighbors and family and local, or you got to get really big so you can get competitive in the prices. By that, I mean the cost of feed, the cost of processing, the cost of shipping and packaging and everything it takes. It makes it really difficult. That intermediate size is probably the most difficult because it just costs too much. Most of the cost of selling these turkeys is on the other end. It's the trucking, the packaging, the processing. And that's if you're buying the poults. You're buying the baby turkeys to start with. And that's another issue. I can get into all the numbers if you want. We've been keeping records for 25 years of what it costs to produce a baby turkey, what it costs to get them on the truck, what it costs to get them in the package and to the consumer. And, you know, you've got to take that in consideration and really be honest and sit down and figure out what is the feed conversion of the particular turkeys I'm buying? What is the expectation of the normal dress weight? Do I ask those questions when I buy my baby turkeys from wherever I'm buying them? What is the history of these birds? Because that makes a big difference. Has nothing to do with the color of feathers per se. You know, what breed, that has nothing to do with it. So you really have to sit down and figure out those numbers. You can't pay $11, $12 a piece for a baby turkey and spend, the cheapest I've seen for small custom processing USDA is $15 a turkey. There's some places that are charging $20, $25. I don't know how you could ever do it. And especially if you're buying bags of feed at your local feed store, which if you sit down and figure out comes out around $800 a ton, you're going to have to charge a fortune for those turkeys to even begin. And that's if they all survive. You know, if you buy 100 baby turkeys from the local hatchery or through the catalogs or whatever, and you're paying $11, $12 a piece for those baby turkeys, and if you just lose 20% of your flock, all of a sudden those little turkeys are now $15, $16 a piece, and you haven't done anything. You haven't put a drop of feed in them. So you really have to figure out, you know, what your plan is. You know, the cheapest way to do it is to keep your own breeders, hatch your own turkeys, you process them yourself, and sell them out your back door. And that way, all the money stays right there. But once you have to pay for all the other stuff, then I don't know how you can do it and begin to make some money.
So talk about scalability a little bit. I know one thing that I preach to a lot of the pig farmers in my community is understanding what your scale is. And so I guess for you, Frank, what was your aha moment in terms of being able to scale, whether that's understanding the value of buying in bulk versus buying, bags of feed versus, buying or selling, a couple of chicks to selling, hundreds. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, as I began to do this, I began to realize the only way I was be able to go forward, especially when I was talking to the bigger processors, because that was the only way. I mean, the cost, of sending to a large processing plant is much cheaper, but they won't talk to you unless you can send them at least a semi-load. That's their break-off, one truck. Now this year we sent 4 trucks. But at that point you can begin to negotiate. You can begin, instead of paying $15 or $20 a turkey, you can get that down to $5 or $6 a turkey. That's a huge difference, but you've got to get to those numbers. The other thing is I knew I had to produce my own poults. I could not, there's no, think about it. If you're buying 7,000 turkeys, baby turkeys, and these hatcheries are wanting $11, $12 a turkey, you've got $70,000, $80,000 up front. And plus just the shipping of them and so on. The other big thing is I wanted to control quality. And the only way I could do that is I had to pick my own breeders, do my own hatching, and to be able to improve the quality of the end product. I mean, I knew what those numbers were, and so I had to be able to produce my own. Now, what I've done is I do have other people that grow for me now, and that helps a lot, but it makes it really difficult to buy, these what people want to call now heritage turkeys. I've called them standard bred all my life. These old standard bred turkeys, if you don't have any idea of what you're buying, if you don't know what the quality is, and what are the expectations? How much should that little turkey weigh at 6 weeks, at 16 weeks, at 24 weeks, at 28 weeks? What is the dress weight of your average flock? And you need to know those numbers, because half of your flock is going to be toms, and that's where most of your money is going to come from. Now this year we lucked out. A lot of people wanted little turkeys. And so that, you half your flock is hens. And so you really have to figure out how you're going to do that. And then the other thing, if you're getting into these larger numbers and trying to sell, you realize that unlike beef or pork, if you send a cow or a hog to market, they cut it up.
Yep.
And you sell parts. And so you can, if there's a bruise, or if there's a mistake somewhere, you can work around it. You can grind it up. Turkeys, you got to sell a whole bird. It's got to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And the processing plant, if you follow the USDA rules and everything that goes with it, they'll downgrade it. So if you send 1,000 turkeys to be processed, it's not unusual to lose 10% of your flock. So you better have a plan, because that meat is still added. You can still sell it, you can still eat it, but you just can't sell it as a grade A whole bird.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a real hard lesson for me to learn many years ago, because, I had nobody to teach me these things. I just had to find out the hard way. But since then, I now have a market for my downgrades. We sell ground turkey, we sell bone-in breast, we sell turkey legs, and so on. And these come for the birds that are perfectly fine, except maybe they had a bruise on one side, or the skin got torn during processing or something. But, if you don't have a plan for that, that'll eat you alive. That's a lot of loss if you don't have a plan for your downgrades. And so, and the processing plants can either make it or break it for you too. So you really want to have a good relationship with that processing plant. And so that's one of the things. And then you have to decide, are you going to be state inspected, or are you going to be USDA inspected? Or are you just going to sell out your back door? That makes a big difference in cost. If you're going to sell across state line, if you're just going to sell at your local market. And every state is different.
Yes, sir.
You have to find out what the rules are for where you live. Mm-hmm. But you need to understand packaging, trucking, movement, refrigerations, all the laws and rules and regulations that come with that. Even if you're selling out your back door, you still have to be able to reassure your consumer that the meat that you're selling is safe.
So really quickly, Frank, who or how did you learn that in terms of really being able to navigate through even the legislation, both state and federal, to sell your turkeys? Did anyone in particular help you out with that? Or was there a resource that was really beneficial for you learning about that?
It was hard. I made a lot of mistakes because there was no place to learn these things. And I paid attention for a long, long time. When they were processing my turkeys, I was there. Mm-hmm. And I talked to anybody at the processing plant or the USDA inspectors who would be kind enough to answer my questions. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know why, what can I do to make this, come out better on the other end? Mm-hmm. And not all plants are the same. Not all plants are as equally, most of these big plants, like where I go now, because of the cost, they're used to doing 20, 30,000 turkeys a day. And so they're busy, huge places. And it's really difficult to find a plant that will even talk to you, will even consider this. In fact, I only know of one in the whole United States. And so, but I had to go that route if I was going to actually make it so that we actually made money. Mm-hmm. And so you just have to go through it. And then but learning what it took to get through the USDA and getting the labels and everything. I finally had to hire a lawyer. They have special lawyers in Washington that you pay them, and they walk your paperwork through. Because it was very, very important to me that when a customer bought one of my turkeys, they knew they were getting the real thing, that it was authentic. And so it was very important for me that my labeling actually said certified standard bred turkey, certified by the American Poultry Association. Well, that had never been done before by the USDA. And so that was another reason why I had to, go through all that to get it through and get the American Poultry Association to back me up and this kind of stuff. So that's an important part of it. The part that's missing for most people is the breeding part. They don't understand. Most people just say, do you want Narragansetts or Bronze or Bourbon Reds, or, that's what they pay attention to. But they don't pay attention to the other part that makes a difference on the other end when you're marketing, when you're selling that bird. My average dress weight on my toms at 24, 28 weeks is 20 pounds. And a lot of these turkeys that people buy don't even reach 20 pounds live weight, not alone dress weight. And so you have to pay attention to what resource, where are you purchasing your poults if you aren't going to become a breeder. But I don't know how I couldn't do this if I didn't keep my own breeders, because it's the only way I can keep the cost of the poults down. I can't do this and pay $11, $12 a piece for a baby turkey.
Well, one thing that I wanted to say before we go to a quick comment break is, you mentioned how you really didn't have help navigating through a lot of that legality and the processing. You had to do a lot of it on your own. I do want to mention that there is a resource nowadays for any of you who are interested. It's the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network that's based out of Oregon State. But it's really a great network for any niche meat processor within the United States. So definitely give that a check if you are interested in learning more about steaks.
Do we lose him?
Ryan, I think you froze.
Oh, say it again?
There he is.
There you go. You froze. Could you say that last part? The most important part. Is there a website for what you were talking about? I can put that up.
Perfect. Yeah.
Does that include poultry?
It should include poultry, if I'm not mistaken. It's underneath. You can look it up at nichemeatprocessing.org. nichemeatprocessing.org.
There's a lot more help out there for beef, pork, and lamb than there is, and processing standard bred poultry or heritage poultry is quite different. Most of these organic pasture chickens and turkeys that are being sold are the same genetics that Butterball and Tyson are selling. And so the numbers that apply to those birds is quite different than what it is for standard bred or heritage poultry. And so you do have to take that in consideration.
Right. Brittany, did we have any questions? If not, I would love to.
We've got a couple that's come in. Let me see. Let's see. Amy says she hatches her own flock of Narragansetts and processes them herself, but she struggles to figure out the price per pound to charge. Do you have any tips for how to figure that out?
One of the things she needs to take into consideration is if she's keeping her own breeder flock, that means she's feeding those birds an entire season. So, and the majority of your cost, all of us are doing hogs or poultry or whatever, is going to be the feed. So she needs to figure out what it's costing her to feed those breeders for that period of time. that's going to be a big figure. And then she can begin to figure out what is it costing her to produce an egg? What is it costing her to hatch that egg and to, get that pulled out? If she's letting the turkeys do the hatching, that's even, if you let Mother Nature do every bit of it, you can do it pretty inexpensively. But that's also going to cut down on the volume that you can have, because the turkey hen is only going to hatch out, maybe if you let her sit on them, she's going to hatch out maybe 6, 8, 10 poults, and that's it for the season. Where if you gather the eggs, you can double the amount if you hatch them yourself. So she needs to take the number one thing, especially if she's processing them herself and doing everything, she's saving a lot of cost. Mm-hmm. And I would think that she could probably, if she's doing it at that, she ought to be able to make money at $5 a pound, because to raise a baby turkey cost per feed for at least my birds. I don't know what her average stress weight is, but would be somewhere around $11 to $12 per turkey just in feed cost. So that's about what it's going to cost to get it from poult to the market age. Now that's why it's important in the toms, because toms are much better feed converters than hens are. But for us, we have the smallest dress weight we could ever begin to have is 8 pounds. And really you want your hens to dress out 10 to 12, 12 to 14, and you want your toms to dress out 18 to 24. And that's sort of your breaking points to begin to get somewhere. But what she's doing is what I suggest to people, either get big or stay small, and you can make some money.
Great. Thank you, Amy, for such a great question.
Great advice.
We've got one more. Charlene wants to know, what percentage of your flock do you retain each year for breeding?
About 10%. It really depends a little bit when I get ready to pick my breeders, what I need, I may keep extra bronze hens that year. I may keep extra bourbon red hens or whatever variety that I need, or I see a particular improvement I need to make. I may be focusing on, because the secret of quality standard weight is your hens. Most people focus on toms who say, well, my toms are this big and everything, and but people don't realize that breeding, it's your female that controls the weight and size. The smaller your hens get, the smaller your toms get. So you really need to focus on hens. And so a lot of times I will say, okay, I've got to really keep back some of these larger hens that are 16, 18 pounds pullets, because they're going to improve the quality of my toms. So about 10% or 15%, it all depends on what I need. Some years, I gotta fill the truck, but at the same time, the whole time I'm deciding, because what I decide makes a huge difference for the next year, next 3 years, next 5 years. Those decisions that you make and your breeders make a huge difference.
Great question, Charlene. We love you. She worked for us, in case you didn't know that. All right. So again, you keep mentioning the breeds and how that's very important. And so one question that I had after watching your last turkey chat was, how do the different breeds affect the marketing? I know that some of them take longer to grow, some of them are at different sizes. So kind of talk a little bit about that for someone who's picking a particular breed or is wanting a particular outcome for their products.
Well, there was a reason in the old days that the standard bronze was number one. I mean, it was raised by the millions and millions and millions in this country. From 1870 to 1950, they were the king. Because genetically, they're the key to everything else. The White Holland turkey is pretty equivalent to the bronze, and should be, when you dress them out, they should look identical to the bronze. The Narragansetts and the blacks, they're basically, Narragansett is a sport of the bronze. And so the color of the feathers, the variety, doesn't make a whole lot of difference. What makes the difference is the breeder behind it. You could get Narragansett turkeys from 10 different people and they would all look different. They would look different in size, in muscle development, in leg length, in keel length, in weight, in fertility. And that has nothing to do with it being a Narragansett. It has to do with the Narragansett breeder. What did that breeder choose? As the old guys told me, you don't eat the feathers. And so, I'm all about preserving known lines. I know the line of my Narragansetts, and they come from people that used to raise them commercially, back in the 30s and the 40s. So they do come with that, but then it becomes my responsibility as the caretaker and the breeder to maintain that. So there are certain characteristics genetically that can affect things. Old Dr. Ed Best, the poultry geneticist from Penn State, always told me that the reason why the bourbon red turkey never got very big is that red gene factor that it carries, he believed actually affected rate of growth and muscle development. So there is something to take into consideration. Now, what I have found in raising bourbon reds now for over 50 years is they will eventually reach that marketable weight, but it takes them about 2 months longer than the other varieties, which makes it really difficult because my market is Thanksgiving. And that means you have to plan accordingly. And if you know that your dress weight is 26 weeks, that's it's 24 to 28, but 26 weeks, that means you got to get all your turkeys hatched out before May 15th is the break off. Otherwise, they won't be big enough for your market. And if you've got a variety that is 2 months behind, that makes it really difficult. So the bourbon red does have a bit of that problem. They eventually will fill out and be beautiful. They just take a little longer. And Dr. Ed Best told me it was because of that. The slate also has a little bit of that same issue. Believe it or not, the slate turkey carries an awful lot of red gene. Now the Beltsville small white is in a separate, has a whole separate history. But the Beltsville small white, which I did about 600 of them this year for Thanksgiving, they did very well.
600, just 600.
They did really well. They dressed out really well. Now they grow amazingly fast, but that was part of the original market for them back in the 50s, that they were actually ready for market 2 weeks earlier than all the others. But and the Beltsville fills out a little better, but they are shorter legged. They're a little shorter keeled. But you play that game if you're going to naturally breed these animals. You can't get the legs too short. You can't get the keel bone too short, or you'll have no fertility. So it's a real balance game that you want to. But the different varieties, the number one thing is wherever your source is of where you're buying them, ask those questions. Any cattle farmer, hog farmer would always ask those questions when they went out to buy their stock. For some reason, poultry farmers, turkey farmers, people don't ask those questions. What is the fertility rate on, if I set 100 eggs, what should I expect in fertility rate? And what is hatch of fertile? And what is the market dress weight on your turkeys at 26 weeks and so on? Because that makes a difference whether you're going to make any money or not. So you need to ask those questions. And it really helps if you can talk to the breeder behind it. And what have they been selecting for? We have a lot of people who breed for feathers. just for pretty feathers. And underneath is nothing.
Can't eat feathers though. Can't
You
eat.
can't eat feathers.
Can't eat them. Well, one thing that just with my experience with niche pork is I've met so many farmers, actually not even niche pork, just in general. I met so many farmers who don't take good records or records at all in terms of their breeding, in terms of their production, in terms of whether or not they're saving money. So after this quick comment break, I wanted to ask you, what are good records that turkey farmers should be taking? Brittany, anyone in the comment section with questions?
We don't have any comments, questions right now. Just people tuning in saying that they're watching. So hello to Kathy Curtis. Thanks for tuning in. And hello to Raiderly Clay. Thank you for tuning in. And that's all. If people have questions, please leave us a comment and we'll get to them with the next break.
Perfect. All right, go ahead, Frank. Talk about good record keeping for heritage turkey, and really, it's a lot of this is translatable, but in particular, heritage turkey production.
Well, when I first got started 20 some years ago, selling on a national level, I've been selling locally for years, but on a national level to like the Heritage Foods. A gentleman by the name of Jeff May came into my life, and he is a nutritionist and food specialist and so on. And he sat down and began to make me realize that what you just said, I was going to have to do. And so I started giving him the numbers, and he set up a spreadsheet and started this program. And he knew what I was charging people for turkeys, and he knew what I was charging for poults and everything at that time. And he came back and he said, "You're losing $3 on every turkey." And he began to show me what I should be charging to even break even. And then we began the program where every day when I gathered eggs and took them into the hatchery, I started keeping records. And then I started keeping records of how many eggs I set every week. I kept records of when I candled, how many were fertile and how many weren't. And then I kept records of, how many hatched and, what was the hatch of set. In other words, I set so many eggs, this many were fertile, how many of them hatched. And so we began to do that. And then, of course, then he started keeping all the records on my feed and how much feed I bought and how much I brought in. And then that allowed us to sit down and begin to figure out what we were going to have to charge per pound to even begin to break even. Now I have over 20 years of those records. And this is a gentleman who is used to working with the big guys, but he just happens to care about what I'm doing and gave me this service. And I have found a number of the people in the big industry enjoy hearing about what I'm doing because this is their history. But anyway, we began to sit down and figure out, what are those? And one of the things he found out after 20 years, at least the line that I have and that I've been keeping, and like my bronze turkeys, like I've said, have been here in Kansas now for 103 years, the same bloodline, they've not really changed. Even Jeff, who does this for the big guys, said he was quite surprised, and he enjoys sharing my numbers with some of the guys at the big guys, the guys from Liberty Foods and Nicholas and so on that run the big hatcheries. Even they're surprised that what these turkeys are capable of doing if they're managed well. One of the books, I don't know if you can see this, Turkey Management by Dr. Marsden. If you can go online and find this book, the numbers that this man has in here, I was trying to see what edition I can't see. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, if you can get like, I think it's the 5th or 6th edition, which came out in the 50s. This man has all this stuff I'm talking about is already in there, as far as what the expectations are for feed conversion, for rate of growth. And he does the comparisons of the different varieties and different breeds. And of course, if you get the later ones in the 50s, when they began to use that word broad-breasted, which began to change how turkeys were produced. But this is an excellent source. You can go on eBay or go on Amazon or whatever, and often find copies of Turkey Management, or Turkey Management, Dr. Marsden. So it's really and I have lots and lots and many books on turkey production, but this is the number one that fits what we're doing. And what your expectations and what is possible if you manage and keep quality stock. Mm-hmm. The only way this is going to succeed is if we keep the quality as high as we can. We've got to go back to raising these turkeys as they were in production back in the 40s and 50s. And the consumers will be able to tell the difference. One of the things you mentioned earlier when we were talking before we came on, you were talking about when people, well, I'll get around to it. When people come to me and say, can I do this for a living? Mm-hmm. I always tell them, no, you can't. It's very difficult to do this for a living. But I have farmers that have been raising for me for 10, 15 years now. And the reason they keep doing it year after year is because it adds to their farm income. Right. You can't do this for a living because, well, I could get into all that, why it makes it really difficult. But if you do it and do it well and try to raise it at a large enough level like this, you should be able to bring in somewhere, if you manage well, it may take you a few years, 10 or 15 or maybe 20,000 a year extra to your family. So some of these families that are raising for me, this allows the wife or whoever in the family to stay home, not have to work off the farm, and to manage this and bring in that extra income. And so it's sort of the system that my parents and grandparents had. We raised hogs, we had cattle, we had turkeys, we had chickens, and the chickens did this, the hogs did this, and the cattle did this. The cattle paid the taxes, and the hogs fed us, and the turkeys paid the chicken feed, and the chickens fed us. So it was just a different approach. But they are capable if you sit down and do your homework. But the other thing is if, like the lady who sent the message about the Narragansetts, if she's raising them herself, hatching them herself, processing them herself, and I remember those type of ladies when I was a kid, 100 turkeys should bring in for you, if you do all the work yourself, should bring in an extra $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a year to your family income. But that you got to do it yourself, because how you will say, unless you have access to your own feed, if you're on a farm where you can produce your own feed, which I have a couple of my farmers who produce their own feed, you can save an awful lot. If you have to go and buy the feed, it's just so expensive. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to make it up by dressing the bird yourself. Mm-hmm. And then if you sell it for $5 or $6 a pound, you should make money. Mm-hmm. You should do all right.
I was going to say, with turkeys and really a lot of poultry, including pigs, about 60% of your production cost is feed. 60 whopping percent of your production cost.
Well, some of the commercial guys, you raise that up to 70. Whew! It's a huge amount. That's why the whole thing, it's like I've had people come to me and say, They asked me if I was feeding organic, and I said, I can't. It's just too expensive. It doubles the cost, you know. But, we figure we make, once you pay for everything, the cost of producing the poult, feeding the breeders, buying the feed, paying for the processing, we're making about $15 a turkey, which is good. The commercial guys that are raising for Butterball, that are contract growers, in a good year are making 75 cents to $1 per pound. That's why they got to raise, 100,000 or 500,000 turkeys, and it'll pay for itself. It's just a different system, and it all has to do with volume. But you're really going to have to figure out if who your market is and who you're going to sell to, and so on. And one of the early things I learned from the Livestock Conservancy many, many years ago, listening to somebody doing this with pigs, the key to doing this is telling your story. You've got to tell your story. People want to hear this. They want to hear the difference. And the other thing is, I try to really focus on what I do and not what somebody down the road is doing or factory farm does. That's their business. I wish them well. I'm just trying to focus on what I do and the history of what I do and find a market for my birds. And I know what they're capable of. So you really have to learn what that means. The other thing is, if you're going to process them yourself, you really learn, you have to learn what that means. And when is the right time to process? When is the wrong time to process? When is the peak? When have I waited too long? That just comes with trial and error. Those are the lessons you're just going to have to learn. And you're going to, just like every other crop, you're in a good years and bad years. And you have to know what those things are.
Well, really quickly, wanted to take one more comment break just to make sure and see if we had any additional comments. And then I got one last question for you, Frank.
We do have a couple that came in.
All right, go for it.
Let's see. Anna wants to know, what variety would you recommend for a beginner for marketing Thanksgiving turkeys?
If you can find really good quality standard bronze, good quality white Hollands, both of those varieties, and if you can find really good quality Beltsvilles. The only thing I shouldn't say Beltsvilles can be a challenge for reproduction, but the bronze and the white Holland, the Narragansett, if you can get good quality large Narragansetts, those turkeys should do good for you. Just make sure you get the quality so that you have those weights that you're going to need, because that's the secret. Whether you're going to make you can't feed a turkey for 6-7 months and have your toms dress out 15 pounds. You're going to go in the hole. I think we lost him.
We lost Ryan, but we've got one more question. Thank you, Anna. We appreciate that. Let's see. Ryan is back.
Yeah,
Last
there
question.
he is.
Welcome back, Ryan.
All right, I like out of existence. I don't know what happened.
It's Monday, technology. Candace wants to know if you can define a small producing farm compared to what is considered a large producing farm.
Okay, that's a good question. What I consider small is what you're capable of handling by yourself. If you're going to dress 300 turkeys in the fall for Thanksgiving on your own by yourself, I wish you well. You're going to be a mess by the time Thanksgiving gets there. And the other part is, if you're going to dress that many turkeys, how are you going to store them? How are you going to keep them cold? How are you going to keep them? That's a lot of tonnage, that you're going to have. You're going to have, but you can do. I've known people that have done that. You want to get fairly decent automated equipment and go down and buy some freezers, just get some, you know, they're fairly inexpensive. Get some box freezers and put them someplace and plug them in. Anything less than 300. Most of the people in the old days who used to process and do their own turkeys and so on, 100, 150 is about manageable. You know, now if you've got a big family and lots of kids and grandpa and grandma and everybody comes and helps, 300 might be fine. But that's sort of the breaking point, unless you're going to buy a walk-in freezer and all kinds of other stuff, because you have to have food safety and the amount of water and space and killing cones and pluckers and everything it takes. Large is anything above 2,000. That's a semi-load. Then you can begin to negotiate with a processing plant and get those numbers down. Most of these small USDA processing plants that are around here that do poultry, there's no, you know, for them to do 100 turkeys in a day is a struggle. And they're going to charge you an arm and a leg. So to begin to negotiate, you've got to get to those numbers. Now, the other thing that we haven't talked about that is possible for these smaller farmers is poult production. You know, you become a provider to sell poults if you're going to keep breeders. And that's another whole thing, you know, what kind of money can I expect, you know, in selling poults? I mean, that's a huge income for me every year. You know, and you sit down, you got to figure out what is the cost of producing a poult and how much am I going to have to charge to be able to do that. Now, if you get into shipping, that's another whole mess. That's a tough business, shipping little turkeys, because people want to blame you for every mistake. You know, they get a box of turkeys, they lose half of them, and it's all your fault. So, you know, but if you're selling out the back door, if you're selling locally, you could, you know, even if you have a small flock of turkeys, you ought to be able to bring in an extra $1,000 a year hatching beyond what you're going to raise, and then on the other end is selling breeders. You know, I won't sell a breeder hen for any less than $100 because that's what she's capable of producing for me in baby turkeys. So that's the other thing that you can do, and understanding that whole breeding program. How long is a hen good for and all this. And the other thing is the best tasting turkey in the world. If you want the finest tasting turkey for Thanksgiving, get a 5 or 6 year old tom. They just roast out beautifully. And that's something very few people have ever experienced. But that's what my mother and grandmother always wanted for Thanksgiving, was an old tom, because the fat is just buckets, you know.
Sounds delicious.
So that's the difference between small and large. Those are the two numbers, I think, where you can control the finances. You can you know, do that.
Thank you, Candace. That was a great question. There's one more that came in. Brett says he has a flock of 10 girls and 1 tom of midget whites. Is there a good ratio that people should look for?
I always tell people never have 1 tom, because if you lose them, you're out of business. Unless you have good access to another tom. My ratio, of course, I'm in much bigger numbers. That's a good number, 1 to 10, but the midget whites in your smaller breeds like that, 2 toms, you always want to have 2 at least. In fact, I think having more than 1 tom encourages fertilization. 2 toms, you know, they fight each other, and I think that increases the sperm count. I think that increases fertilization. I mean, it's no different than the deer out in the wild or the elk or anything else. Toms like to know they've had their time. That's the least you'd want to have, if at all possible. You always want to have, I try to do 1 to 20, and because you want to have plenty of hens, but you never want to have just 1 tom, unless you have access to another tom quickly, because they'll, you know, But that's a good place to start. The midget whites can be somewhat aggressive breeders, so, but most turkeys are aggressive breeders, or should be active aggressive breeders.
Thank you, Brett. And then Gail wants to know, at what age do you retire your breeding individuals?
Well,
Good question.
that sometimes gets personal, because even though I'm doing this and I'm processing turkeys, inevitably I get attached to a few. And, if I have a hen that has just been fantastic and she has just reproduced year after year after year and has just earned her pay, then I'll let her die of old age. I've got some hens out there. A lot of times when they get 10, 12 years old, it makes it hard for them to compete against the young girls and so on. And I'll go put them in a separate barn by themselves and just sort of let them live out their life. Usually the breaking point on most hens is going to be about 7 to 8 years of age. What happens though is I find even though your 2 or 3 year old hens lay less eggs than your pullets, you still get the same amount of pullets, because the hen that is 5, 6, 7, 8 years old may only lay 40 eggs a year instead of 60 or 70 eggs a year, but she'll have almost 90% fertility. A lot of times your pullets, those first 20 eggs you get are infertile. Sometimes it takes turkeys a while to figure out how to do it and to have sex, and they'll lay eggs long before they're fertile. So I've always said that if you want the best fertility, and it's even in old Dr. Marsden's book, and he was right, 1-year-old toms on 3 or 4 year old hens. That's the best. Sometimes it takes young toms a few tries to figure out how to do it and how to balance and not fall off. But once they do, then the old hens, they know what to do. They've got 2 or 3 years of being with the toms, and they know what to do, and you're going to have higher fertility rate. So that's what I think is the best. You can, all depends on when you retire. If you can butcher a 4 or 5 year old hen, and they're perfectly fine to eat. But, usually that's if they get really, really old and if they're a special hen, whatever, a lot of times I always tell people when they come here, which you very rarely see on a turkey farm, I have turkeys that die of natural causes. So that actually do die of old age. I had a 12-year-old bourbon red tom that finally died this fall. I had him separated, and he was getting pretty arthritic and so on. But he had been a foundation turkey for me, and so I thought he had done his job and had the right to die of old age. So, but that's having that personal connection, that makes it unique, in raising these turkeys. I have a lifelong personal connection to them. And so that makes a difference, I think, in what you do.
Absolutely. Gail, thank you for such a great question. And thanks to everybody for sending their comments and questions today. We really appreciate that.
Well, I learned a whole lot about turkeys and turkey sex, so didn't think that was going to be, the thing for today, but I appreciate you explaining that to me, Mr. Frank. I did have one more question, and then I will leave it at that. You mentioned how a farm really being able to be successful, especially at your level, you're using other people, and I like that idea because it's a cooperative spirit. And one thing that I always teach is having a cooperative spirit, not trying to do every single thing on your own, but being able to have partnerships with other people, whether they're doing what you're doing or doing something different. And so really, 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 really quickly, talk about how your cooperative spirit has allowed you to be successful and who you've been partnering with.
Well, right now, and what I've done all these years is cooperated with other farmers as growers, and use a different model. I mean, the farmers who grow for me, they buy the poults from me, and then the birds are theirs. So they have full responsibility, even though on the other end, when the turkeys are sold, they're sold under Good Shepherd, and because they did come from here. But I have found the more the farmer has control, the more the farmer realizes, I own these birds. These are my birds. And what we get paid is what we put in. The better it comes out on the other end. They take it real personal. And they know after a number of years that they're not going to put a bad turkey on the truck because they're going to lose on the other end. So, and that just takes time. Now, the part that really worries me still is I have no other breeders. I've not been able to pass that on to teach people how to breed turkeys and to at a larger volume. You know, how do you manage a breeder flock of 2,000 or 3,000 turkeys and gather those eggs and all that kind of stuff? And how do you select? I mean, to this day, I still, when it comes time for me to pick the breeders, I have to do it. They're just, I mean, how do you walk into a flock of 5,000 turkeys and pick out the top 100? And why? And what are those reasons? And that's really important. And somehow I've got, my mentor, Norman, who taught me, would come here every year for 40 years and we would pick the breeders. And then I lost him about 15 years ago. And so it has fallen upon me. And he had people before him that taught him. So I don't know how we pass this on to the next generation. That part of it. And what you're talking about is really important because my dream is eventually there will be more family-owned breeder farms that become a central location to a number of farms. I mean, this is a system that's nothing new. This is the way all farms were up until corporate farming. And so you guys are from North Carolina. I can, there was some wonderful, in the Shenandoah Valley that, if you go way back, the Wappler farm there, that was huge. And he was a breeder and supplied turkeys. And I can say the same thing in Texas or Vermont or wherever. But those are all gone. And so somehow we got to bring that back.
Somehow we got to bring that back. I love that. I love that a lot. That's kind of what the mission of the Livestock Conservancy is really all about, is making sure that we can do what we can do, partner with whoever we need to partner with to conserve these heritage breeds. So first off, Frank, I want to thank you for the work that you've done. You've dedicated basically your whole life to this. And the results have been amazing. And what you've been able to do with these heritage turkeys really has been remarkable. So again, I appreciate what you've done. You're a fine gentleman, and I thank you for how you've been able to also support the Livestock Conservancy with your membership as well. Brittany, did you have any thoughts or any closing comments?
Thank you for joining us. Tune in tomorrow for our very first Goose Chat. It's December. We're wrapping up Turkey Month, but we're very, very excited that you could be here with us today, Frank, and really dig into the business aspect. I think that's a really important part of being successful with heritage turkeys is having a successful business. So I'm really glad that people could tune in today and get some of your wisdom.
Well, thank you. And just remember, you can raise them for the pure fun of it.
Absolutely. Turkeys are very fun.
You won't make any money, but you'll be enjoying them.
Oh, also, Giving Tuesday, that's tomorrow, right?
That is correct. Yes, thank you for remembering that. Giving Tuesday is tomorrow. Please give on our website and help make turkey chats possible, goose chats possible, anything else that you see on social media. It's fall appeal time, and that drives 88% of our revenue. So we would like to still be able to help people breed heritage turkeys next year. So and that is our shameless plug for the day. But yes, thank you to everyone. We appreciate it. We hope you have a great afternoon, and we will see
Thank
you
you.
later.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.